Hey, how's it going? My name is Riley, and I'm a documentary filmmaker that likes talking about everything from filmmaking and creativity to faith. So recently, I've been filming on the Sony A7S Mark III and have paired it with my Atomos Ninja V and have been trying out the ProRes RAW capabilities that this combination can deliver. And for the most part, my experience has been super positive. I've really enjoyed this pairing and have been super happy with the purchase. But I wanted to make a quick video about the 5 things that I don't really like about this combination. I think it's important for anyone who's considering investing in this camera and this external recorder to know what some of the drawbacks and limitations are. So let's dive in. Right away, when I paired the Ninja V with my A7S III, the first thing I noticed was that the time remaining on the SSD is actually incorrect. It actually displays about 3.5 times less time than you actually have to work with. So for example, if your time remaining says that you've got 10 minutes left, you actually have probably around 35 minutes left. This was a little bit of a shock and was kind of confusing to me at first because I didn't know that this was an issue. And so at first I thought that the data rates must just be huge, and I was incorrect in assuming how much the data rates are. But the data rates are pretty reasonable, and it's somewhere between ProRes 422 and ProRes HQ. So if you have it's set to ProRes HQ and your monitor says that you've got about 35 minutes left and you switch it over to ProRes RAW or ProRes RAW HQ, it's gonna say you have about 10 minutes left. And it's just something to keep in mind. The time will actually tick down slower at about 3.5 times the rate that it should. So you should hit 0 when you actually have 0 left, but it's just something to keep in mind. You'll have to do a little bit of math and thinking on set. It's definitely something that I think Atomos can fix in a future firmware update, but it is something to be aware of, and it is something that's a little bit inconvenient to work with. One other thing to keep in mind when using this combination to shoot ProRes RAW is that we don't have white balance controls just yet. I know that it's available in this program called Scratch, and I haven't tried it yet, but I'm planning on it. But it's not available right now in Final Cut, which is my editing software of choice. When you think about other RAW formats like Red and Blackmagic, or even a still photo, you have the option to manipulate the white balance in post. It's definitely something that adds a level of flexibility that is really nice, and unfortunately we don't have that control just yet. I know that Apple added the controls for it in Final Cut Pro, so it should be coming on this particular camera, but at the moment it's just not there yet. One other thing that isn't really my favorite about this setup is that you have to change the frame rates in the HDMI output menu tab. It's a different menu tab than the regular frame rates and codecs when recording internally, and so it just adds an extra step, and you have to go through the menus to do this. Fortunately, you can program this menu item in the My Menu tab to access it quickly, but it also means that you're not able to save the raw frame rates to the mode dial on the top of the camera. I know a lot of people will program 1, 2, and 3 on the top of the camera to be 24, 60, and 120 frames per second, but with the raw output, these items don't actually save to the mode dial, and so you're forced to go into the menu and change the frame rates from that section. It's a relatively small complaint, but it's just one extra little step to be aware of when you're shooting in RAW. One other little quirk that I ran into is that the zebras don't seem to display correctly when using the Ninja V in S-Log 3. Specifically, when you use zebras, I like to set it to 94 internally in the camera because that is the clipping point for the zebras. And when I put the zebras at 90 or 95 on the Ninja V, nothing showed up. I had to drop the zebras all the way down to 80 to be able to see that same clipping point. So it's another little quirk and hopefully something that Atomos can address in a future firmware update. The last thing to add to my relatively short list of quirks and complaints and things to be aware of using this setup is that there's no 4K at 120 frames per second. I feel like personally this is a pretty petty thing to add to the list, but it is something to be aware of. I don't feel like it's a huge deal because we do have a high quality 10-bit 120 frames per second in 4K with using the internal codecs on the A7S Mark III, but it is just something to be aware of because you are limited to 4K at 60 frames per second. Personally, I think it would have been awesome to be able to have some kind of burst mode or just something to be able to use, but again, this is a really minuscule complaint, and I guess we'll just have to wait until the A7S Mark IV comes out to get this. Well, I think that just about rounds out my list of quirks and complaints and things to be aware of. To be honest, I struggled a little bit making this video because the experience overall has been super positive. But I think it's important to put a few of these things out there and hope that Atomos and Apple and possibly even Sony gives the necessary firmware updates to be able to resolve a couple of these things. But also, I just think it's good for people who might be considering investing in the system to know what to expect when they're going to make that purchase. Let me know in the comment section below if you've run across any quirks or complaints or issues about this setup. I would love to hear from you. As well, I would love it if you would like this video and consider subscribing. It really is the best way to help me support this channel. Thanks so much, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.